Welcome back. You're watching Gravitas. Washington is in a frenzy, and the word ruling the headlines is impeachment. Will President Donald Trump be impeached barely 4 months into his presidency? Here's the latest. Amid the storm over intelligence leaks to Russia, an unfazed Donald Trump dined with Turkish President Erdogan and even spoke about his meeting with the Russians.
Well, we had a very successful meeting with the foreign minister of Russia.
His National Security Advisor, General McMaster, insists no inappropriate information was shared. The opposition wants proof.
The president must make transcripts of those conversations available to the intelligence committees. The president should make full, unedited transcripts available immediately. No ifs, no ands, no buts.
His colleagues on Capitol Hill were no less critical.
Well, I think he owes an explanation to the American people, and we need to hear it.
Russia's not our friend, and the president needs to exercise discipline when he's talking to leaders.
This is all a part of the lack of discipline in the White House that has got to change.
The word being whispered in the corridors of power is impeachment. The question being asked, can a president be impeached for leaking classified information? Technically, no. As president, Donald Trump has the constitutional power to decide what is confidential. In contrast, US officials would be facing jail time if they'd done what the president did. Others say such leaks put American lives under threat and risk intelligence sharing relations with other countries. So Trump may have violated his oath of office. That's not a criminal offense, but enough for impeachment charges. 3 American presidents have faced impeachment or been impeached for violating this oath. President Andrew Johnson offered amnesty to Confederate officials and vetoed civil rights protections for former slaves. He was impeached for being unmindful of the high duties of his oath of office. President Richard Nixon faced impeachment proceedings after the Watergate scandal and was said to have acted contrary to his oath. President Bill Clinton, who faced impeachment after lying under oath about an affair with a White House intern, was said to have acted in violation of his constitutional oath. Unfortunately for Trump's critics, impeachment has never led to a president's removal from office. Clinton and Johnson were exonerated in the Senate. Nixon resigned before the House proceedings were over. Also, it seems unlikely that Donald Trump will face impeachment immediately, given that the Congress is controlled by his party. Bureau Report, WION. Interestingly, the response to Donald Trump's critics came from the Kremlin. Russian President Vladimir Putin called the controversy a case of political schizophrenia, made light of the concerns expressed by many in the US, and offered to share the tapes of Trump's meeting with his foreign minister.
I'll be forced to issue him with a reprimand because he did not share these secrets with us, neither with me nor with representatives of Russia's intelligence services. It was very bad for him. Moreover, if the United States administration finds it possible, we are ready to provide recording of Trump-Lavrov talks to the US Congress and Senate. Of course, if the US administration wants it.
And joining us this evening, Jonathan Landay, national security correspondent at Thomson Reuters. Good evening, Jonathan. Good to have you on the show. How and how much does Vladimir Putin's statement... Yes. How much does Vladimir Putin's statement change the story?
It doesn't. It was in sarcasm. It doesn't change the story. What's happening here is not so much now a matter of the alleged leak of classified information to the Russian foreign minister and his ambassador here in Washington by Mr. Trump in a meeting last week. What is now swirling is the fact that the former FBI director, Comey, James Comey, apparently wrote a memo after his dinner. He had a dinner with President Trump, in which Mr. Comey wrote that Mr. Trump asked him to drop the FBI investigation into Trump's former national security advisor, Michael Flynn. Now, that is where things are, where the new storm is, and that is much more potentially a problem for the president, as it could constitute obstruction of justice, which is a far more serious matter than a breach of oath of office. We've had, and it may be that the political ground here in Washington is starting to shift. As you pointed out, the Republicans have a very healthy majority in the House of Representatives, where articles of impeachment must be approved by a simple majority. Up to this point, the House has been very loyal, House Republicans have been very loyal to the president, but we're starting to see cracks as a result of the disclosure of this Comey memo, first in the New York Times and then by others. We've had one Republican member of the House now talk about the possibility, or at least broach, I should say, the subject of impeachment. We've had several others who are now talking about the need for an independent investigation. And we have had a chairman, a Republican chairman of an investigative committee, demand a copy of the Comey memo and has threatened to issue a subpoena if he is not given that memo. All of this is taking place against the backdrop of the fact that there are legislative elections next year. The entire House of Representatives is up for election, and enough members of the Senate are up for election that all of this, plus the outcry over the president's or the Republicans' health care plan, very controversial, all of that could reverse the Republican control of both chambers. That is where things lie. Now, there are Republicans who are running in districts that are not safe for them anymore, and those are the people we are looking at to see whether or not they break from Mr. Trump and start adding their voices to the calls for not just an independent prosecutor, but we're listening also for anyone else who mutters the word impeachment.
What you're saying is very, very important, Jonathan. First, leak of confidential information, then breach of oath of office, and now you're saying he's been accused of obstruction of justice, which is very solid ground.
Potentially.
Potentially, yes. For impeachment proceedings. So my question to you is, are people seriously considering that, or is this still just rhetoric?
No, I think certainly the Democrats, of course, opposition Democrats, we've been hearing that from them. The question is whether or not the majority Republicans in the House start moving in that direction. We've heard today, for the first time, a House Republican broach the matter of impeachment. But it's early days yet. We have to wait and see where this is going. But certainly, the Republican majority in the House and in the Senate are feeling the heat of this growing controversy. In particular, as I said, the revelation that the former FBI director wrote a memo that we've learned about it, others have learned about it, in which he said the president asked him to drop an FBI investigation into his former national security advisor. And that potentially, as I said, could constitute grounds, could constitute an obstruction of justice. And that is serious.
And of course, the president's reactions and his responses to what others are calling very serious lapses. For instance, this sharing of information or leaking of confidential information, as his critics are calling. He came out and said, "I'm the president. I decide what's controversial, what's confidential, and I decide what to share with others." How serious are these issues that Donald Trump is making light of?
I think they're very, very serious. They have basically forced to a halt consideration of any other major legislative issues, whether it be health care, whether it be infrastructure construction, whether it be whatever his legislative agenda was. That is all ground to a halt by all of this. And we're going to have to wait and see where this goes. As I said, though, the political ground now does seem to begin to be, it seems to beginning to shift under the president. Now, the White House has denied that the president asked Mr. Comey to halt the investigation into Michael Flynn. And the White House points out, President Trump himself has pointed out, that he does have the legal authority. He is the only one in the entire United States government who has the legal authority to declassify classified intelligence other than the agency that produced the intelligence. In other words, under the declassification system, the agency that produced the intelligence has to declassify it. The president is the only other individual in the entire government who can do that.
Right. Jonathan Landy, thanks very much for putting all of this in perspective. Another very interesting statement came from Britain on what's going on in Washington. Prime Minister Theresa May, barely 3 weeks away from the crucial snap polls that she announced herself, came out in support of the US president.
Decisions about what President Trump discusses with anybody that he has in the White House is a matter for President Trump. We continue to work with the United States and continue to share intelligence with the United States, as we do with others around the world, because we are all working together to deal with the threats that we face. The key threat, of course, being the threat of terrorism, predominantly from Daesh, but we must never forget that Al-Qaeda is still out there. So working with the United States and others to deal with that terrorist threat is an important part of maintaining our national security, and we will continue to do so.
And now the Australian Prime Minister has announced a ban on laptops on airline cabins, and this is also being connected to the intelligence sharing or leaking, as many are calling it, from America to Russia. Is this a fallout of that? Was something shared with Australia as well? Is the question many are asking. The Prime Minister of Australia has not commented on that. This is a story we're tracking very, very closely, but wrapping this edition of Gravitas. And finally, with this, borders are often the source of discord between nations, but if viewed from another perspective, they make a stunning picture. We've got one such perspective for you from space. We're leaving you with this. Thanks for watching.